What's up, everyone? Welcome. I started this channel because there's been a gap in the conversation for a long time, especially for second generation guys. And most of what does get talked about never really helps. The topics are there, but they're shallow. There's no depth, and the angles people take are usually off. So instead of waiting around, I decided to start. This isn't a political channel. It's not about negativity, and it's definitely not about fake positivity either. It's about real conversations that actually move people forward. That's why I'm calling this channel Brown Maxed, because a lot of us aren't underperforming due to lack of effort, but because we've been operating with bad information. I'm second generation South Asian, and for most of my life, race wasn't something I thought about much at all. Growing up, I was usually one of the few brown kids around, and it never felt like a disadvantage. I dressed basic, didn't take the gym seriously, didn't overthink dating, and things just worked. But over the last few years, as the demographics around my city shifted, something changed. The reactions, the assumptions, the initial read people had of you, all of that felt different. And at first, my instinct was to assume it was something personal, like I was doing something wrong or needed to improve in some vague way. The assumption I grew up with was pretty simple. Be yourself, put your best foot forward, and things tend to work out over time. And for a long time, that assumption was actually true. What changed wasn't me. It was the environment that assumption was built for. Once population density went up and people started relying more on shortcuts and pattern recognition, being generally solid stopped being enough. Dating and socializing stopped being about who you are over time and started being about how you're categorized instantly. That realization was uncomfortable, but it was also clarifying. Because once I stopped taking every interaction personally, I could finally see the pattern. And once you see the pattern, you stop arguing with it. You adapt to it. One place this became really obvious was in public venues like bars and clubs. I started noticing that certain newcomers were extremely forward, borderline persistent, and whether I liked it or not, I was being grouped in with them. Years ago, you could be forward, and it was read as confidence, as long as you were reading the vibe. Now, especially in crowded environments, there's an extra comfort barrier. Women with high interest react pretty much the same as before, but women who are on the fence seem to filter you through stereotypes first, not imaginary ones, but ones reinforced by what they're seeing around them in real time. That shift forced me to become much more conscious of how I present myself. I always cared somewhat about fashion. I'd buy new shoes once in a while, or some designer here and there. But in the last few years, I've taken it to another level. Now it's like even if I'm just going to the grocery store, I'm thinking twice about what I'm wearing. Same thing with the gym. I used to just show up, scroll on my phone, do a few sets, and leave. Now I've got a real routine and a meal plan. Add grooming on top of that, things I barely thought about before. Not because I suddenly became insecure, but because the environment changed. These things stopped being optional and started feeling necessary just to be read correctly. What's ironic is that I'm objectively doing better now than I was years ago, but the effort required is much higher. Before, things fell into my lap without much thought. Now it feels like you need to be sharper across the board just to avoid being misclassified. And I know this isn't just a guy thing. Even my sister has noticed similar shifts. There's also this unspoken pressure now to constantly signal assimilation, to show that you're not that kind of guy. Sometimes it shows up in subtle ways, like people randomly bringing up cartoons or pop culture from when you were a kid to see if you recognize them. Almost like a quick background check. It sounds ridiculous, but that's genuinely how it plays out sometimes. And before anyone jumps in with exceptions, that's fine. I'm talking about patterns, not isolated cases. A big undertone of this channel is that it's not really for the average person. Not because I'm trying to be edgy or negative, but because the average approach just isn't working anymore. There's not much room for neutrality now. You're rarely read as just a guy. You're placed somewhere on a spectrum, almost immediately. Even silence or ambiguity gets filled in for you before you have a chance to explain yourself. And this doesn't just show up in dating, it spills into everyday interactions too. Even basic things like manners and how you talk to people. I was never rude before, but now I'm much more conscious of being extra polite, especially to service workers and people in public. Part of that is because some guys are openly rude and disrespectful. And on the other end of the spectrum, you've got guys who are complete pushovers, no backbone at all, often because they don't speak the language well or are worried about their visa status, so they come off as easy targets. The weird part is that creates pressure on both sides. You're trying to be extra respectful so you don't get lumped in with the rude ones, but at the same time, you're more on edge because people are quicker to test you or get confrontational, thinking you'll just fold. Having to constantly calibrate between being polite and being firm is a tension that just didn't exist a few years ago. And I know this isn't just where I live. I've noticed it in other major cities too. Even when I travel, the difference is obvious. In places where I'm one of the few South Asians, I'm usually received better. But in cities that have had a large influx of people who look like me, there's noticeably more scrutiny. And this isn't limited to North America or Europe. I've noticed it in parts of Latin America and Southeast Asia as well over the last year or two. This is also why advice like, just be confident or just be yourself feels so disconnected now. Confidence only works when it's interpreted correctly, and interpretation depends heavily on context. In lower density environments, confidence was read as confidence. In higher density environments, confidence gets evaluated first. The margin for error is smaller. You get fewer second chances and fewer opportunities to be judged over time instead of instantly. That's why everything feels heavier now. Interactions feel more loaded. Social energy drains faster. Autopilot doesn't really work anymore. And when effort goes up, while feedback stays neutral, even small wins feel smaller. What used to feel like progress now just feels like baseline, and that's exhausting if you don't understand why it's happening. I also want to be clear about what this channel is and isn't. This isn't about blame, not toward immigrants, not toward women, not toward any group. And it's not about giving people formulas or scripts to follow. My goal with Brown Maxed is to talk about what's actually happening, socially, culturally, perceptually, so people can stop blaming themselves for things that aren't personal. Once you understand the environment clearly, you can decide how you want to move within it. Some people will adapt how they present themselves. Some will change the spaces they spend time in. Some will realize certain environments just aren't worth the energy anymore. But none of that starts with tactics. It starts with understanding reality as it is. So yeah, these are just some of the ways my approach had to change as the environment around me changed. There's a deeper layer to all of this, but I'm keeping this first video focused on observation and experience. More videos are coming where I'll break things down further from different angles and with more detail. For now, I'm curious, has your experience been similar? I want to hear what you've noticed. Drop it in the comments. I read all of them. See you guys in the next video. I got plenty of ideas in the vault.